So, Krystal, what's on your radar today?
Well, New York Times Magazine's Rosina Ali has an in-depth look at our calamitous post-9/11 security climate with some major implications for our current debate around domestic terror. Here is that story. The Herald Square bomber who wasn't. After 9/11, U.S. authorities used informants to secure hundreds of terror convictions, but did they help create plots where none existed? Now, this piece delves into the details of the Pakistani immigrant who was convicted for what sounded in the press accounts like a disrupted plot to attack one of New York City's busiest subway stops. I actually remember reading some about this at the time and feeling tremendous relief that such a potentially deadly and horrific attack had narrowly been avoided. But the reality of this plot was much different than the picture that the government tried to paint. Shawar Matin Siraj was a devout Muslim. He worked at an Islamic bookstore. He had no history of violence, and he was described by everyone who knew him, including his own mother, as not very bright. His IQ was just 78. So while working at that bookstore, he was befriended by an older man named Omar Eldawoody, who held himself out as a sort of scholar. He flattered Siraj by taking an interest in him, serving as a sort of mentor. Siraj confided in Eldawoody about a woman he loved back in Pakistan and was pleased when the older man would offer him a ride home from work. Soon, though, their discussions turned political. Eldawoody complained about FBI harassment of Muslims. He showed Siraj photos of Abu Ghraib and other horrific pictures of Muslims being tortured, raped, and killed. Soon enough, they were floating vague ideas about how to get back at the U.S., landing on a scheme to bomb Herald Square. All the while, as Eldawoody was helping to radicalize Siraj and encouraging him towards violence and helping him to plot an attack, he was also working for the FBI, being paid over $100,000 to work for them as an informant. Now, according to the Times Magazine, as soon as they settled on Herald Square as the target, Siraj started to have some misgivings. He worried about kids getting hurt. He worried about someone dying. The more real the plan actually got, the more that Siraj balked. In a tense conversation that was recorded by the FBI, Siraj refused in no uncertain terms to plant a bomb, but he did agree vaguely to serve as a lookout. Even on this matter, though, Siraj hedged. In the FBI recording, he informs his co-conspirators, "I have to, ask my mom's permission." Wow, really sounds like a hardened terrorist there and threat to our national security, huh? But of course it didn't matter. Government had what they needed. They prosecuted Siraj for 4 counts of conspiracy, including plotting to bomb a public transportation system. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Now think about this case. Just ask yourself, did the government's actions make us safer? The FBI essentially radicalized the slow-witted man and then manufactured their own terror plot. If it weren't for their actions, there would not have been a plot to bomb Herald Square at all. Meanwhile, this was great press for law enforcement, of course, and the national security state. New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly and Mayor Michael Bloomberg, they loved to crow about all the terror plots that they had disrupted. Great for their careers, great for their political standing. This plot was disrupted mere days before the RNC. It gave George W. Bush a fantastic propaganda win on his way to re-election. He and the tough-minded Republicans were doing what it takes to keep America safe, even though, of course, the truth is that America and the world would have been dramatically safer if we had literally done nothing in response to 9/11. The informant himself was able to build a reasonably comfortable life for himself off the money that he made radicalizing Siraj. The FBI had, of course, preyed on Eldawoody's own precarious financial situation. It was all a neat and tidy package for the propaganda machine, the neocons, the national security state, with their vested interest in keeping Americans terrified to justify their ever-expanding powers and their ever-expanding budgets. It's nothing but security theater to give us the illusion of fear and the fiction of the police state keeping us safe. This wasn't a one-off series of events either. ProPublica did a deep dive into the 14, quote, full-blown terror plots supposedly disrupted by the NYPD to great fanfare. They found almost every single one of them lacking. Reading the details here is deeply depressing. Informants incentivized to uncover plots in order to get out of their own legal trouble or given significant payouts. Plots that are so nebulous, it is totally unclear whether anyone was actually planning anything at all. Defendants who are gullible, unintelligent, and clearly mentally ill. The only full-blown terror plot that the NYPD appears to have had anything to do with, really, was a dramatic failure for law enforcement. The terrorists escaped notice until bombs had already been planted at Times Square. So what emerges is a portrait of a government much more interested in winning propaganda wars and scaring the crap out of the public than actually keeping Americans safe. Muslim immigrants, of course, were the convenient scapegoats for this entire project. Now, it's important to understand this history in part because it's actually not history. This crap is certainly still going on, But second, because especially after January 6th, there's been a whole lot of discussion of treating domestic terrorism the same way we treat international terrorism. Democrats like Congressman Adam Schiff has called for new domestic terror laws. Pelosi has embraced a 9/11 style commission on the January 6th riots. These stories about the war on terror, they tell us exactly why we must reject such an approach completely. As Stanford University law professor Shirin Sanar told The Times, we treat terrorism in an exceptional way. The ordinary rule of law does not apply when it comes to terrorism. No ordinary oversight or democratic accountability. Surveilling entire communities, routine entrapment, manipulation of poor and mentally challenged people, and concocting terror plots just so that the government can then swoop in and be the heroes disrupting those plots that never would have existed without the government manufacturing them. What we did to Muslims after 9/11 was shameful. It is a stain on this country that will last forever. God forbid we expand these practices even further. And Emily, obviously everyone wants to be safe. No one wants to see any sort of terrorism attack. And that sort of fear-mongering was used to justify this incredible expansion of powers after 9/11. And in hindsight, we can look back at these plots and say, this didn't keep us safe. This was really ineffective. This was more about the security theater than actually keeping the American people from harm. And yet here we go again with a lot of people looking to repeat the exact same mistakes, only with a broader net this time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this around and circled to January 6th, because as you were recapping the story, which is amazing, it was raising the recollection in my mind of what happened with the alleged plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. If you remember this from last year in Michigan, where the FBI infiltrated a white nationalist cell and then basically incited the kidnapping plot through the FBI agent.
Right.
And the question then is, you have these lumbering behemoths in the security state and in the intelligence community that have expanding power in the post 9/11 era, and then you have the mixture of political incentives for the propaganda victories that now Democrats want in the same way that Republicans used them in the mid-aughts, and that is a terrible combination. We are very lucky that we haven't had something on the same scale as 9/11 happen over the course of the last 20 years, and I'm sure we have a lot of people in the intelligence community to thank for that, but there is clearly a problem of inefficiency here. Just as you talked about, you mentioned the Times Square bombs had already been planted.
Right.
And that's where this gets to a question of, are you actually making us safer, or are you working for the politicians to earn propaganda victories? Where are the priorities, and how are you aligned to be efficient at keeping us safe?
The other thing I was thinking a lot about is, after January 6th, and let's be clear, in the sort of post-mortem that the Inspector General of the Capitol Hill Police looked at, basically, first of all, they didn't even have proper equipment. Mm-hmm. Second of all, they were told not to use their most aggressive tactics. And so if they hadn't had those failures in place and they ignored the intelligence coming in, you probably have a totally different day. But those very failures are using to give the same people who failed more power.
That's exactly what's happening.
So you have the clear, visible signs of a security lockdown in D.C. You've still got all the fencing up. You've had these endless National Guard deployments that people who used to be really concerned about the militarization of American streets needlessly suddenly are really quiet about. And look, again, I get it, because these are things that really shake us to the core. They really scare us, whether it's 9/11, whether it was those attacks on January 6th, whether it was other, the Times Square plot or any of these things. They freak people out and they want to feel safe. But rather than getting safety, what they're getting is this security theater that's making them, number one, the point of it is to make them be reminded that they should be afraid, to keep that fear instilled in them, so that when you see something like this, Herald Square bomb plot disrupted you. Oh my God, what a narrow miss. This is horrific. And what you don't find out is that actually this was all basically concocted, would not have existed without the government themselves intervening and trying to get this person to concoct this plot and get close enough so that they could go ahead and arrest him. Expanding that doesn't keep us safe. It doesn't do what you want it to do in terms of bringing the tensions down, in terms of bringing the country together. It expands the powers of people who have been some of the most nefarious actors in American history. And it just creates this patina of security theater rather than any actual security for the citizens of the country.
Look at the basic process you just laid out. It's the government failing and then asking for more power after the government failed. If we boil it down to the basic ingredients of what's happening in this process, and this is something that's frustrating to me all the time as a limited government person, is the government screws up, and then instead of saying we need to sort of be leaner, we need to be more efficient, we need to realign our priorities, they ask for more power, they ask for more resources, they ask for more money, with absolutely no plan to use those resources better or to use them more effectively. Government never asks for less power, and this is a great example of how even when they prove themselves unworthy, they literally use their unworthiness to ask for more power.
To grab for more power. That's exactly what's going on here. All right, we're going to be back with more Rising right after this.